It seemed like a shortcut at the time, one of those winding back roads that you only hear about from locals. I'd been driving for hours, my headlights cutting through the foggy, desolate highway like a knife. The night stretched on endlessly, the kind of endless that makes you question whether time has any meaning when you're all alone in the dark. I had already missed my exit, and the signs had become sparse. No lights, no other cars. Just me, the road, and the strange, oppressive silence that filled the air. I glanced at my GPS, but the signal was gone, replaced by an ominous, no service message. I wasn't too concerned. I had a full tank of gas and figured I'd find a gas station or town soon. My phone, too, was starting to lose charge. It was just one of those nights, the kind you only notice once it's too late. I'm not sure what made me do it, but after a few more miles of nothingness, I saw a sign for an alternate route, a smaller, more secluded road that cut through the woods. My gut told me to ignore it, but for some reason, my tired eyes followed the arrow and I turned. The road immediately felt wrong. The asphalt became rougher, darker, and less maintained. The trees on either side seemed to close in, their branches reaching down as though trying to grab me. The air grew thick, as if the fog had become a part of the very atmosphere. I knew I was losing my way, but somehow, I couldn't turn back. The hum of my engine and the low whine of the tires on the uneven road were the only sounds I could hear. A few miles in, I noticed the first strange thing, an old rusted sign by the roadside. The paint had chipped away over the years, but I could still make out the faded letters. No passing zone. There was something off about it, as if it didn't belong on such a remote road. I slowed down, scanning the area, but the trees were dense. There was no town, no signs of life, just the empty road stretching on forever. A part of me screamed to turn around, but I couldn't. It was like the road had its own pull, an unseen force guiding me further. Suddenly, the headlights flickered. I cursed under my breath, hitting the switch a few times to make sure they were working. For a moment, I thought the car was going to stall, but it kept going, the engine sputtering once or twice but ultimately keeping its rhythm. I knew I had to find a place to stop soon, just a safe spot to pull over and check the car. But the road kept twisting, narrow and treacherous, with no sign of a safe place to pull over. I began to feel a gnawing sense of urgency creeping in. That's when I saw it. A figure stood in the middle of the road ahead. A person, or something resembling one. They were far enough ahead that I couldn't make out details, but I could see the shape of them standing motionless in the headlights, a dark silhouette against the misty night. I slowed, then stopped completely, my breath catching in my throat. What was someone doing out here, this far from civilization? I rolled down the window just a crack, the cold air cutting into me. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness. "Are you okay?" The figure didn't move. They just stood there, swaying slightly, as if the wind was nudging them. I honked the horn. Nothing. No response, not even a flinch. Something about the stillness unnerved me. It was too quiet, too still. I considered driving around the figure, but something kept me rooted in place, my hands frozen on the wheel. Suddenly, the figure tilted its head toward me. I wasn't sure if I imagined it, but I swear it grinned at me. A slow, unsettling grin that stretched far too wide for any human to manage. Then it slowly began to move, dragging its feet as it started walking toward my car. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and jerked the wheel, swerving around the figure, not daring to look back. My heart pounded in my chest as the road curved sharply ahead. I didn't know if I was being chased, but I could feel the presence, close, right behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming after me. But as I sped up, I realized something even more terrifying. The road was changing. The trees were getting thicker. The darkness around me deeper. The road was becoming a tunnel, and I was racing through it with no end in sight. There were no more signs, no landmarks, just endless trees and the occasional glimpse of a shadow darting between them. I looked in my rearview mirror. Nothing. No figure. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then the engine sputtered again. The lights flickered. The car groaned, as if it were on the verge of giving up. My stomach twisted. I could see a small break in the trees up ahead, a clearing. Maybe a cabin or something. Something that could give me a sense of security. I decided to risk it. As I neared the clearing, I saw it. An old wooden structure, weathered and abandoned looking. There was a faint light in one of the windows, and I could see a few discarded items near the front porch, old furniture covered in sheets, falling apart from years of neglect. I pulled over and cut the engine, my hands still trembling on the wheel. I wasn't sure if it was the car that was failing or if I was just losing my mind. The silence felt oppressive, like a weight pressing on my chest. I needed to check the car, but something told me I should stay inside. I looked over at the cabin again. The window with the light was still there. It wasn't much of a light, a flickering candle, maybe, but it was enough to catch my attention. Then I heard it, a soft, low thud, followed by another, then another. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving closer. I froze. My hand shot to the door handle, but before I could open it, there was a knock on the window. A soft, quiet knock. I didn't dare look. Another knock. Louder this time. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to know who or what was out there, but my curiosity pushed me. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. And there, just beyond the glass, was the face. It wasn't human. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over a skull with hollow, dark eyes. Its lips were thin and pulled back in a cruel, unnatural smile. I saw its breath fog the glass as it exhaled, like it was watching me from the other side, savoring the fear that was coursing through me. I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal, and the car shot forward, tires screeching on the gravel. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But the road was different now. The trees seemed to close in tighter. The fog had thickened, and the darkness seemed to stretch infinitely. And I realized, with a sinking feeling, that no matter how far I drove, there would be no end to this road. No escape. I wasn't alone out here anymore. I could hear it now, soft whispers on the wind, voices, calling my name, just faintly at first. But as I pressed the pedal harder, they grew louder. It wasn't until I reached the next turn, and the car slid around it, that I understood. The road hadn't changed. I was lost. The road was never going to let me go. And somewhere, out there, in the mist, I knew it was waiting for me to make the next turn. It was supposed to be a quick drive. Just a few hours on the road to visit some friends at a secluded cabin in the woods. I had a full tank of gas, a playlist of podcasts to keep me company, and the open highway ahead of me. But somewhere along the way, things began to feel off. It started subtly, an odd flicker in the headlights, a strange change in the air, the unsettling quiet that hung over the night like a thick fog. I didn't think much of it at first. A tired mind plays tricks, right? But the more I drove, the worse it got. And the further I went, the more I realized I was driving into something I couldn't escape. I had been driving for hours when I missed the turnoff. At first, I didn't even notice. My mind was on autopilot, listening to some boring true crime podcast, the kind that barely keeps your attention. It wasn't until I passed the same faded billboard for the third time that I realized I'd gone too far. I glanced at the GPS. No signal. Typical. I muttered under my breath, annoyed. I wasn't worried. I knew the area well enough. A quick glance at the map on my phone would get me back on track. But when I pulled over to check my phone, the battery was at 12% and the signal was still gone. As if being lost at night on some obscure back road wasn't bad enough, I was now driving blind. I sighed and pressed forward, figuring I'd stumble upon another turnoff or small town soon enough. The headlights cut through the thick mist, but everything around me looked the same. Just miles of empty road, trees stretching out like dark, skeletal arms. The silence was oppressive too, like the world had gone still and held its breath. No cars passed me, not a single light to guide me. After a while, I saw something. A sign, small and rusted, buried behind a thicket of trees. Alternate Route 23, it read. My gut told me to keep going, to stay on the main road. But the thought of turning back into the dark was more terrifying than taking a risk. So I decided to follow the sign, thinking it might lead me to something familiar, or at least somewhere with people. I made the turn. Instantly, the road changed. The asphalt was cracked and uneven, and the trees on either side began to crowd in, leaning over the road as if trying to close it off. I slowed the car, the tires skimming over potholes and loose gravel. The air felt thicker, heavier, like I was driving through a veil, and the sound of the engine seemed to fade as the night wrapped around me. I didn't know why, but I started to feel like I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and the road ahead felt darker. Even with the headlights on full beam, I could barely make out the outlines of the trees on the edge of the road. It was almost as if the darkness had its own weight, pushing back against the car, closing in. I kept driving, hoping for something to break the monotony. A town, a gas station, anything. But the further I went, the less I could shake the feeling that I was going deeper into something I wasn't meant to find. I looked at the GPS again, still no signal. My phone was down to 7%. I cursed softly. That's when I saw the first sign. It was an old wooden post, almost hidden by the overgrowth. The paint was chipped and faded, but I could still make out the letters. No passing zone. It didn't make sense. There was no one around, no other cars. Why would there need to be a no passing zone on a road like this? The unease settled deeper in my chest. Something was off. I slowed down, my foot hovering over the brake. My headlights swept over something just off the road. A shadow. Not an animal. No, it was too tall. Too human. I froze. It was standing there, perfectly still, just past the tree line. I couldn't make out details, but I could see the shape, tall, dark, and unmoving. My mind screamed at me to keep going, but something about the stillness was wrong. It wasn't right. The figure didn't belong here. It wasn't supposed to be out here in the middle of nowhere, standing in the shadows of the trees. I rolled down the window just a crack, the cold night air cutting through me. "Hey," I called, my voice shaky in the silence. "Are you all right?" No response. My hand gripped the wheel tightly, but I couldn't look away. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, unmoving. I honked the horn, once, twice. Still nothing. Then it moved. It didn't walk. It just shifted like it was gliding toward me. Its head turned slightly, tilting to one side in a way that seemed unnatural. I felt my stomach drop, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I slammed my foot on the gas, swerving the car away from it, my heart pounding in my chest. The engine roared to life, but my mind was caught on the image of that figure moving in the darkness. It felt like something was chasing me, even though I couldn't see it. The road ahead twisted and turned, sharp curves that made the headlights dance and play tricks on my eyes. I drove faster, desperate for anything that would get me out of this nightmare. But the road seemed to stretch on forever. No end in sight. I glanced in my rearview mirror, expecting to see nothing but dark road. But there, just in the reflection, was the figure again. It was closer now. A dark shadow, just outside the reach of the headlights, moving with impossible speed. My breath caught in my throat. I looked ahead, then back again. The figure was closer. Much closer. It was gaining on me, moving through the trees, faster than any human should have been able to. My hands shook as I clutched the steering wheel, my foot pressing harder on the accelerator. Suddenly, the headlights flickered. For a split second, everything went black. I cursed, trying to hit the switch to bring them back, but the car stalled. The engine sputtered, and I could feel the power fading. I was losing control. But then, as suddenly as it happened, the headlights flickered back on. The figure was gone. I slammed the gas pedal, forcing the car forward, praying it would keep going. My heart was racing, my mind swimming in fear. I needed to find a place to stop, to check the car, but I couldn't bring myself to. Not after that. The road twisted again, and I saw something in the distance. A clearing. A small cabin sat on the edge of the trees, abandoned, but maybe it would offer shelter. Or at least a place to gather my thoughts. I pulled in, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. The cabin was small, weathered, and overgrown, but the faint glow from one of the windows gave me a moment of hope. I cut the engine and sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the night pressing down on me. The cabin didn't feel like a safe place. I got out of the car anyway. The door creaked as I opened it, and I looked around. Nothing moved. The wind rustled the leaves, but there was no sign of life. I took a step toward the cabin, but then I heard it, a soft, deliberate thud. Another, and another. Footsteps. Slowly, coming closer. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The footsteps were too close now. And then the knock. So, almost gentle. I spun around, my blood turning to ice. I didn't dare look back. But I could hear it again. A knock. Louder. More insistent. Then the figure was there. It was standing behind the car, not moving, just watching. I could see its face now, pale, stretched skin pulled tight over a skull-like face. Its eyes were hollow, dark, empty. A slow grin twisted its lips. And I realized, too late, that the road had never been my choice. The figure didn't need to chase me. It was already here. I should have known better than to take the back roads. It's one of those things you hear from locals when you're traveling through unfamiliar places, the kind of half-joking advice that's meant to make you feel like an outsider. Don't take the back roads at night, they say, or you might never come back. I had heard it 100 times before, but like most things, I brushed it off. It was just superstition, right? I was just passing through, heading home after a business trip, the kind where you're stuck in meetings all day and too tired to care about anything except getting home. My phone's battery was almost dead, and I'd already missed my exit, so I figured I'd take a shortcut. There was a sign a few miles back that pointed to a small town I was familiar with. It promised a quicker route. The GPS had no signal, but it wasn't the first time. I wasn't worried, but as soon as I turned off the main highway, the feeling hit me. Something was wrong. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for my car, and twisted like it had been carved through the woods by accident. There was no streetlights, no other cars, just the faint sound of my tires crunching over the uneven asphalt. The only illumination came from my headlights, and even they didn't seem to cut through the fog that had started to roll in. I don't know when the fog appeared. It was as if it had been waiting for me, ready to swallow me whole. At first, I thought it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. The mist felt thicker than usual, yes, but it was nothing new. I've driven through fog before. The thing that unsettled me was how still the world had become. No birds, no rustling of leaves. It was silent, unnervingly so, as if the air itself had been frozen in time. And as I drove, the road didn't seem to be leading anywhere. It just kept winding on, each turn more disorienting than the last. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 12:35 a.m. No sign of the town yet, and my fuel was starting to get low. I couldn't turn back now though. I figured I'd keep going just a little longer. Surely the town was close. It had to be. That's when I saw the figure. It wasn't a person at first, but something darker, a shape moving just beyond the reach of my headlights. I slowed down, squinting into the gloom. There was something there, a silhouette against the trees. I don't know what made me stop, but I did. My foot hovered over the brake pedal, and for a moment I just stared. The figure didn't move. I pulled the car to a stop a few feet away. My hands were sweating as I reached for the door handle. The night air was cold, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. "Hello," I called out into the darkness. My voice cracked, weak in the quiet. No answer. Just silence. I considered driving away, but I couldn't. Something was keeping me there, something that felt like it was pulling me toward the figure. I didn't know why. Maybe it was a person in distress. Maybe it was my tired mind trying to make sense of the strange sight. I don't know. But something about it made me roll down the window just enough to shout again. "Hey, are you okay?" I called, my voice louder this time. But still, no response. It didn't even flinch. The figure's shape was tall, almost unnaturally so. Its outline was too dark, too solid against the fog. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't look like a person at all. It was more like a shadow or a trick of the light. But it was there. I knew it was there. I honked the horn. twice. Nothing. They moved. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks, but no. The figure shifted, tilting its head slowly toward me. And that's when I saw it, the grin. It stretched wide, far too wide for any human mouth, a sickening, impossibly large smile that split its face. The grin didn't belong. It wasn't natural. My heart slammed against my ribcage. I hit the gas pedal without thinking, swerving around the figure, my tires screeching as I floored the accelerator. My headlights illuminated the road ahead, but the fog only thickened, swallowing everything else in darkness. I didn't dare look back. The road ahead twisted in impossible ways. Every turn seemed sharper, more disorienting. The trees closed in, their branches bending toward the car like claws. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I saw something, movement, just beyond the trees, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I kept driving. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my hands gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The engine sputtered once, and the lights flickered. My pulse quickened. This was it, the moment everything went wrong. The car lurched. The headlights died. I cursed under my breath and hit the switch again, praying they'd come back on. They flickered again, and for a brief, horrifying second, everything went dark. I was blind, trapped in the pitch-black fog with no way to see where I was going. Then, just as quickly, the headlights came back on. But it was worse now. The fog was thicker, more oppressive, and the road in front of me had changed. The trees, once just looming, were now packed so tightly together that it looked like a tunnel. I had no idea where the road was leading, but it felt like it was pulling me into something. I glanced at the rearview mirror. My stomach sank. It wasn't just the fog or the dark. It was the figure again. It was there, farther behind me now, but unmistakable. The outline of its tall, thin shape was moving quickly through the trees, and I knew, without a doubt, that it was following me. I didn't know if it was chasing me or if it was simply moving with me, but my heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was drawing closer. I pressed harder on the gas. The car sped up, the engine groaning in protest. The fog closed in around me, suffocating. The trees seemed to bend in on the road, and I saw shapes darting between them. Shadows that weren't there before. Something was out there, something that shouldn't have been. And then ahead I saw something. A small, flickering light in the distance. A house or maybe a cabin. It looked like it might be my only hope. A place to stop, a place to breathe, to find some sanity in the midst of this nightmare. I pushed forward, my hands trembling on the wheel. The car sputtered again and I thought for sure it was going to die, but somehow it kept going. I reached the cabin, a small, decrepit building surrounded by overgrown grass and trees. The light inside flickered weakly, casting strange shadows across the porch. I parked the car and sat for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. I wanted to run to the cabin, to find someone, anyone who could tell me this was just a bad dream. But then I heard it. A knock. So unmistakable. My breath caught. The sound came from the passenger side. I dared not look, but I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, I turned my head, my blood running cold as I saw it. There, just outside the window, was the face. It wasn't human. Not anymore. It was pale, its skin stretched tight over the bones of a skull, eyes hollow and black. Its lips were thin, pulled into that same grotesque grin. And I saw its breath fog the glass, as if it was savoring the fear. I didn't think. I just reacted. I slammed the car into gear and floored the accelerator, the tires screeching as I took off. I didn't care where the road led now. I just needed to get away. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. No figure, no face. But something deep in my gut told me it was still out there, just waiting. And I knew deep down I would never find my way home.